Computer. Okay. Hi, Alaina. Thanks so much for joining me. It's so nice to see you.
Yes, hello. My name is Alaina Lestine. I'm pretty much graduated. My major's finished, but I have one more class. But I went to Michigan State University and I graduated with a degree in kinesiology with an athletic injury focus and then a photography minor. So yeah, very random, I'm all over the place clearly.
I didn't know about the photography. That's very cool.
Yes, I happened to just take a few classes and then I actually won picture that I ended up taking. I took a photography class over the summer and I was in Peru and one of my pictures ended up like winning an award. I won like $1,000 for it. So
Pretty,
yeah,
pretty, pretty
it
nice.
was random.
All right. So tell me a little bit about, Jewish life on campus at Michigan State, how you engaged with that, if at all, throughout your time there, and just sort of, anything you think would be interesting for current high schoolers to learn.
Yes. So Michigan State, I will tell you, it depends what realm you go into. Can you be either be the most Jewish place as most schools that probably Midwest schools you'll see, or it's very un-Jewish. I don't know if that's the correct terminology for that, but it's very not Jewish. So my freshman year, I was on the Michigan State cheer team, and I had so many people tell me, "You're the first Jewish person I've met." And which was really exciting because I was like, okay. And a lot of people didn't just be like, oh, you're the first Jewish person. Cool. I don't care. Everyone wanted to ask me questions. They asked me about the holidays. They asked me about the prayers. They asked me about Israel. They asked me about the language, about Hebrew. And so it was really exciting to kind of, tell people about this. And I do have a few Hebrew tattoos and Jewish things on me, which is, funny in its own. But I do have a few of those. So it was really interesting. I get people asking me, they're like, oh, what does that mean? Because I have a chai on my ankle. And they asked me, oh, what does that mean? And so it was really interesting to kind of just, explain and like my roots, because for me, we're from a predominantly Jewish area, and so it's very different to go from very Jewish to non-Jewish. And so I definitely could have done more things regarding my Jewish life, but I did. I was part of Hillel. I actually worked for Hillel for a semester or 2 semesters. I did JLF, which is their Jewish Life Fund, and it was really interesting. And my roommate sophomore year, I didn't even know happened to be Jewish, and so I was able to meet a lot of Jewish people through her, and it was very interesting because the Michigan Jews are very different from what I've noticed. While obviously you have your stereotype of like your Jewish American princess type Jew, they were very different up there. They were more like New York Jews than I expected. I was expecting a little bit nicer DC Jew, but no, they were very much like New York Jewish, and they were either very Reformed Jews. I didn't really meet any super religious Jewish people, but I did one girl, Lexi, who I'm actually still very close with. She worked at Chabad, she worked at Hillel. She was very involved in her Jewish life. And so even though I wasn't as involved, it was good to always hang out with her and kind of, remember those are my roots. They do Hillel programs and they had, birthright programs. Although I did birthright through Maryland because I did it with my home friends instead. Um, but it was definitely what I expected. It's a Midwest school and it's not University of Michigan. So I expected there not to be many Jewish people, but I didn't expect there to be such a shock when meeting Jewish people, which was, not rude. I didn't take it as anything rude, although it has been interesting, seeing them then post about the conflict recently, but that's a whole nother story.
That is, I mean, it's an interesting position to be in because you're almost like an ambassador for the religion. If these people, this is their first encounter with anything related to Judaism. So good job spreading the word.
Thank you.
But it sounds like there was, while there were people, that had no experience with Jewish students or Jewish people, there was also plenty of Jewish life if you wanted to take advantage of it.
Oh, absolutely. They had SDT, which is your Jewish sorority, and then they had API, which is your Jewish fraternity. Those are both traditionally Jewish. A lot of my home friends were in those uh, frat sororities. Mainly, they, of course, all Jewish people that came from here that went up there. But it was interesting because one of my first frat parties, I went to API because my friend who's 2 years older was in the frat, and he said, "Come visit. Like, you'll have fun. You'll meet some Jewish people because they're hard to come by here." And he made that as a joke, but I realized after the fact, I was like, okay, fair. You know what? That's fair. And when I went in there, everyone knew who I was already, which was interesting. Some of them knew them from me. Some of them knew them from, they're like, oh, like, I heard there was another Jewish girl from Potomac, Maryland, or they knew them from cousin's best friend's sister from random places.
Jewish
Um,
be at its best.
Yes, I was my freshman year when I was on cheer. I had a girl come up to me before, so I hadn't been at any of the summer camp things because I went to South Africa that summer. That's a whole nother story if you want to hear that. That's a really funny story. She comes up to me, she said, "You're Alaina, right?" I said, "Yes." And I didn't have anyone, on social media. So I was like, what the heck? And she said, "My boyfriend is an API and he told me to look out for a redheaded girl named Alaina who's joining the team." And I was like, so he's Jewish, so he knows my friends, and that makes sense. And it was funny. She ended up becoming one of my best friends on the team, and like we still talk. And so it's like, I love Jewish geography. It's super fun.
But it makes you feel, it's comforting when you go somewhere far away to know that wherever you go, you will find your people.
Yeah, I mean, that happens to me everywhere. I recently went to go visit a friend in California, and she had told me like 2 weeks before, she said, "I met this guy who knew you." I was like, okay. And this is a college friend from Michigan. She moved to LA for a job. And I was like, oh, okay, who is it? And she told me the story. She said, "I met this guy. He said he's from Maryland." I said, "I knew one person from Maryland." And he asked, "Is she Jewish?" And I said, "Yes." And he's like, "Well, there's a 100% chance I know her then." And it happened to be someone who went to my rival high school and used to snowboard with my brother. Um,
Of course, of
yeah,
course.
so I was like that naturally. And she's like, I was so surprised because here I am in LA at some random, house party. And the guy says he knows you. And I'm like, I just have that influence. It's Jewish geography, I'll tell you.
That is amazing. But good to know that it follows you all the way to Michigan. Um,
Yes. Yes, yes,
that's
yes.
great. So remind me, what was, when you were looking at colleges, was Jewish life something that was important to you? Was it something that you even considered at all, as far as, whether there was a Jewish population on campus?
I definitely wish I considered it more. However, everyone thought I was going to go to Indiana and be an SDT and be like the Jewish sorority girl. Because at the time, I definitely had that stereotype. But once I kind of found my field, it was more about where the best program was. And Michigan State definitely, compared, my final two options were Michigan State and San Diego State. And Michigan State was definitely my best option. However, I do wish I considered Jewish life a little more because not that I didn't, I enjoyed that I had some Jewish life. I mean, if I went to Michigan, because I also did apply my like at the end of my freshman year to transfer, and I did get in, but I didn't end up going. Um, I definitely sometimes wish there were a few more Jewish people here and there, but at the same time, I don't think I'd change my college experience because it was really interesting to be able to kind of explain a whole new thing. And like it was just very interesting because in the Midwest, I didn't realize how sheltered certain people, certain areas were, because especially with politics too, like we're from right outside of DC. You have a political opinion, and if you don't, that's just considered, you're uneducated, and that is the highest of of offenses here. And so in Michigan, a lot of people didn't have political opinions, didn't have religious opinions, I guess, except for, if you're not Catholic, I don't care. And so that was kind of the attitude for certain things. If you weren't this, I don't care. And so the fact that I was able to just kind of talk to so many people and understand it. And even in my program, I had athletes ask, "Oh, you're Jewish," and things like that. And we'd talk about it. It was interesting because there was a guy that I became very close friends with who was, his dad died around the same time, and then his mother had breast cancer and passed away around the same time as mine. And he said, religion was really important to me. And during the time when he was doing that, he said, I at first didn't think, God was real. I didn't understand, what was happening. And even though he ended up being Catholic, he said, I went to different churches. I went to a mosque. I went to a synagogue. I was curious. I was like, I just want to understand what these other religions are praying, because it doesn't seem to be working for me. And so it was interesting to have that conversation, because you don't really talk about religion a lot, because sometimes it can be taboo. And it was really interesting just to see everyone's opinions and their understanding, and then be able to kind of be their first breath of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's great that you were able to sort of, in a sense, realize what a little bit of a bubble you had come from.
A bubble is speaking lightly, very much so. I'm lucky, especially, the privilege being a white Jewish woman in a very nice area living in DC. Like I did not realize how lucky I was until I went to Michigan, and till I don't want to use a curse word. Because I'm trying to, the one nickname for East Lansing was East Bumblefuck, because it was just so it was so out there and just very, it was a college town. It reminded me kind of Penn State college town, but I was like, even Penn State has a little bit more of going on there than Michigan State does. But I'm glad I went there. It was a good experience. I was able to make a whole new life for myself, and it was really good because I know I'll be living somewhere else for grad school. I most likely will live abroad at some point in my life. I looked at grad schools abroad even. So yeah.
Well, speaking of, this is a sort of segue abroad, but one of the things I wanted to hear a little bit about is whether, and it sounds like you might have encountered some anti-Semitism, anti-Israel,
Oh.
as at the time that we are recording this, there is a lot going on in Israel, for people who may be watching this later. So I'm curious to hear what your experiences were on campus.
So on campus, there wasn't too much necessarily religious wise about any anti-Semitism, which I was surprised because especially with right now in the presidency that we just had, it was a rise of those type of acts. But there really was nothing too crazy that I personally experienced. We have a rock that people paint on often,
Mhm.
and I don't want to. Let me look this up before I say this. But I don't. It might not have been Michigan State, but there are a few like in Michigan schools have like rocks that you can paint on, and for like your causes. And I think at one of the Michigan schools there was a swastika painted on it at one point. But for the most part, I understand. I know that anti-Semitism goes on, and in people don't realize that they are being anti-Semitic. But I was very lucky to not encounter that as much at Michigan State. I really encountered just curiosity, and certain people would ask me questions. They're like, "Is this anti-Semitic?" And recently, when I was in Michigan before I came home, I had a friend post something that was very anti-Semitic without realizing it, because she was like, well, maybe you should talk to families in the Palestinian area. And I said, just realize what you're saying is like, it's not that I am anti-Palestinian, rights. It's that I'm anti-Semitic, like I'm anti-Semitism. And so certain things and certain words, since Israel's a Jewish state, they associate that with being Jewish. And so explaining that to a few people recently was definitely an interesting conversation. And I don't know if you remember Danielle Singman. I don't know if she ended up, I feel like she might have talked to you at some point, or someone like a college counselor, but either way, she was with me, and she is in international government. That was her field. And so one of my friends literally had like an hour long FaceTime call with her because she just wanted to understand better. She said, I understand that infographics aren't the best way to get something that is so complicated. Like, Black Lives Matters and other issues where there's just very much a right and a wrong side. This is not that. And so infographics are not that. And so they had a whole hour long conversation. She asked all these questions. She asked, what is Zionism versus anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitic. And it was just so interesting. They just genuinely want to learn. And I know that there have been anti-Semitic issues, in the state of Michigan, but I personally did not see them as much. I just was always brought on with curiosity and questions, like always lots of questions.
That's great.
So,
That's exactly what you want to hear, that people,
yeah.
like it's fine if you've never met a Jewish person. It's great that you were able to, that they're curious and you were able to educate them and share some of your life. And it sounds like you never felt uncomfortable, which is.
No, that was one really good thing, is I know, again, I'm in a bubble there where I never felt uncomfortable being able to talk about my religion openly, which, in some places, especially right now, some people do. And so I understand that, again, I am in another bubble that I have never felt uncomfortable talking about my Judaism. There's only one instance I've ever felt uncomfortable having a chai tattooed on my ankle, and that wasn't even in this continent. So, I understand I'm in a bubble.
No, I think I think it's great that you were able to get out of it and, just again, share it with everybody else. So any sort of final advice that you would give to high schoolers who are in your shoes from 5-6 years ago, looking at colleges?
If your mom hassles you to go to Hillel for Passover, or not even Passover, honestly, any high holiday, there is a good chance there will be matzo ball soup, and you should really take advantage of that. Or if your Hillel has Sunday morning brunches, I promise you they're free, and you don't have to go buy that $4 bagel. You can just go get the free bagel that's probably walking distance. I realized that, my junior year, I would go with my friend every Sunday because it would be the perfect hangover food. They give you matzo ball soup, they have all the bagel and the fixin', and it was free, which is really exciting in college.
That has been a big theme of the interviews I've been doing recently, free food from Hillel.
Yes, and Hillel always has such good food, and especially when I did JLF, they would give us dinner every Tuesday night. And so it was good to kind of, have a home cooked meal, or Jewish home cooked food. It was really good. We'd have matzo ball soup, we had brisket. It was just, I felt like I was at home. And so even though you might not be looking for a school that is necessarily super, Jewish, it's definitely seek out the Hillel or Chabad house. They have them any school, even if you're in the Midwest, or, even if you're in Texas, they have them, So
They do. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is going to be really helpful, I know, to students who are looking at Michigan State and just looking at schools outside of, this area.
And I promise Michigan State, when you get there, it definitely will be rough your freshman year because that campus is massive. I mean, to go from corner to corner, like opposite corners, it probably is an hour walk. However, it is worth it. It is the most gorgeous Big Ten campus, and I've been to, I want to say almost all of them. I haven't been to Wisconsin and I haven't been to University of Illinois, but I have been to, or University of Iowa, but I've been to almost every other single one. And it is gorgeous and it's worth it. And definitely is a fun place to be if you're looking for party school. I'll tell you that.
And Becca, you did pretty well academically and are on a great.
Yes, and that's the most important thing. I also had money to school that I'd gotten like coming into school, and somehow I kept $3,000 a semester. I don't know how because my grades did not warrant that, but I kept it, and it was exciting. So I didn't get free study abroad money, which is really good for out of state students. That is what sold me on Michigan State. Literally, that was my thing.
Great.
So
Great.
yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.